We do want to start today's show off marking the 17th anniversary of Hurricane Katrina, which is today, August 29th. We also want to recognize the 1 year anniversary of Hurricane Ida as well. But for many people, the images from that devastating event are still difficult to watch. So, how do you know if it's more than just distress and it's actually a sign of unresolved issues? Well, today, Susan Harrington, a licensed marriage and family therapist with Maison Vie, is back on the show to talk about the signs of something called complex PTSD. Susan, thank you for joining us virtually.
I'm so glad to be back. I haven't been here since New Year's Day, so I'm excited.
Yeah, we're so glad to have you on, and I'm glad we're talking about this topic because, look, two big events that really many of us watching, and both me and you
Mhm.
can remember what happened to us. And, I want to talk about this complex PTSD because there's actually been research done in regards to this topic. What does the research say about what complex PTSD is?
So it's really interesting. What we know was done the year after Katrina. Purdue University sent us a busload of researchers out in the area where everybody had been evacuated to. And what they learned was all those people who were in the identified areas of the evacuation spaces probably met all the criteria to have PTSD. That meant you and I for that. And so if we did not seek treatment intentionally for that event, then we probably developed complex PTSD, right? So it's a really intense and important thing to decide if you have or not.
It really is an interesting, discussion that we're having because it is a little bit different from, we'll say, regular PTSD. There are really three different signs. Let's start with the behavioral signs. What should we be looking out for if we think we have complex PTSD?
So complex PTSD shows up when we have a complicated set of emotions and activities and behaviors that show up, right? So the behavioral ones are listed on the screen. Notice that what's really important is we begin avoiding things. Like we don't want to watch the weather. Somebody brings up, there's a hurricane and there are storms coming through right now, right? So we have storms coming through. I don't want to talk about that. We start this avoiding behavior. We get very aroused when anybody brings that topic up. Our anxiety levels go up. We might even isolate. When we hear those topics happening, we might leave the scene. And on the opposite side, we might actually watch video footage and watch it and screen through. So I know that on our presentation today, we have these images. So for those of you watching these images, if you start to feel that arousal, you may want to consider seeing if you have complex PTSD because it is 17 years later. Right.
It is
So
so
those
true. And I want to ask you, Susan, as well. So, do you suggest maybe if they do have complex PTSD, on a day like today, an anniversary of a huge event, that we don't necessarily look at the images, don't look at the videos, because, of course, they're going to be all over everything, especially today.
it's important that we consider what happens to us when we look at the images because sometimes they show up without us even knowing they're going to show up. What I would encourage is that you don't intentionally go and start scrolling through because what happens is we get into a zone where we disassociate. And that would be a clue that complex PTSD is on board.
Let's talk about the emotional and cognitive signs because, that's also something in regards to complex PTSD. What should we know about these signs here in these two categories?
Right. So here is these signs. So these are literally things that happen emotionally within us, right? You want to think that the other ones are also happening. What's important when you look at this list is that these things are under the category of the last one, emotional dysregulation. What that means is that I have emotions on the inside and I'm having difficulty regulating them. So the anxiety will show up and I'm not expecting it. I'll feel hopeless throughout the day or at night. I'll react to things that I don't usually react to. Like I might slam a plate because someone startled me. Those sorts of things will show up. When I'm looking through those video screens, like I said, those video footages, like we said earlier, the numbness kicks in. That happens as well. If a thunderstorm, we're having a lot of rain happen very consistently at this time of year. And so if the thunderstorms start to increase your anxiety on the inside, that would be a sign that you need to get some assistance.
It's so interesting because, everybody watching, really think about this. Where do you fall in when it comes to this? Here are some of the cognitive signs right here: flashbacks, nightmares, hypervigilance, definitely things that I've seen in my family for sure, especially after Ida. How can we help our families and friends who are struggling with something like this?
So it's really important, right? So yes, all these signs show up. You even have sleeplessness and you've gone to the doctor and if you've gotten medicine, that's not going to address the concern. So how we help those that we care for is, first, I've got to put my own mask on. I've got to be in a place where I'm okay sitting with you and being very attentive to you. So there's a list also that can be pulled up that shows that complex PTSD, when it's not addressed, gets really serious. So it's important that we start to be very mindful when we sit with somebody, to actively listen to what they have to say, to validate their experience, not to try to fix it, not to be judgmental, not to try to not make you not have those feelings. Don't hand them tissue if they're crying. It's an important aspect to let that emotion move through. It's important to stay very present and engaged with them as well, to acknowledge everything that they've done so far. Look, it's 17 years. Every storm, you have this anxiety. It shows up. It's okay. You get to the other side, and it works out just fine. It's important to encourage them to prepare some sort of aspect to go through these things that are listed here. Those are really important.
I completely agree, Susan. I want to thank you so much for this conversation this morning. Like I said earlier, take a mental picture of how you fall into this. Do you have it? And if you need help, luckily Maison Vie is available to you. They are doing some really cool things on Google Meet. You can set up an appointment with Susan by calling 504-452-5937 or heading over to MaisonVieNewOrleans.com. We'll be right back.